Very briefly, some of you may know all of these gentlemen. Some of you will know none of them. But Jakob Thomasen, furthest from me, is obviously from Maersk Oil. Joined Maersk Oil in '88 as a geologist. He's been in Qatar as a department manager. He's back in Copenhagen by the year 2000, and back to Qatar, then back to Copenhagen, head of exploration and new business, and finally CEO. By far, of course, the largest operator on the Danish shelf. Mr. Cook is now with Dong Energy. Since 2014, Group Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer. That means chief. And before that, Mr. Cook was with the Abu Dhabi National Energy Company and previously also head of TAQA in the Emirates from 2010 to 14, and 20 years with BP. I'm sorry if this is very brief. I could say a lot more, but leave it at that. Mr. Cook is a geologist and geophysicist, and obviously nowadays one of the most central people in the whole of the Danish energy sector. Gilbert van der Brink from Wintershall has been with Wintershall since 2002. Previous to that, he was with Shell in Brunei, amongst a lot of other things. For Wintershall, he's been in the UK, then back in the Netherlands, and as director for the Netherlands and the North Sea. Also, in this context, I think it's worth mentioning that Mr. van der Brink, from 2009, held the position of chairman of NOGEPA, the Dutch Oil and Gas Association for Producers. And finally, closest to me, Mr. Edwards, Vice President Europe at Hess Corporation, based in Stavanger at the moment. Previously in London, Islamabad, Algeria, Perth, probably many other places, for BHP Billiton, tackling just about, I think, all possible management challenges in the industry. So, ladies and gentlemen, we couldn't be in better hands, and we have half an hour. Imagine that with the 4 chief executives from the North Sea, the Danish shelf. Maybe we should just sit and watch for a while. No, obviously not. This is important. Mr. Thomasen, we've heard of all the troubles in the Danish sector of the North Sea, maturing infrastructure, etc., etc. You know the drill. Why on earth is your company still investing time, money, resources of all sorts in trying to make money on this useless piece of subsoil?
Well, if we take a step back, Maersk Oil is a global company, and we firmly believe, like Wood Mackenzie, that oil and gas will be an important part of the energy mix going forward for many years to come, and that there will be a need for companies that can produce this oil and gas safely, responsibly, and of course commercially viably. And we believe that we are one of these companies. And after that, you know, Denmark is our cradle, but it's in global competition with all the other countries where we have activities or where we wish to have activities. But we actually are seeing Denmark as a pretty good opportunity for us still. I'm not trying to make it sound easy. It's a challenge, not just by the oil price, but by the maturity. But we have been careful in running our facilities, maintaining them such that they still have a life. There's work to be done, but there's opportunities for us to improve the recovery and do more brownfield work. And we are also active in the exploration arena. So we still look at Denmark as a good place to make money.
You use the word cradle. Is this also an emotional issue?
No, it's not. But you know, working in our business is a combination of the conditions of the nature, water depth, subsurface, reservoir quality, and so on. And then the above ground condition, which of course includes the fiscal regime, but also the risk or the ease of doing business. And clearly for us, having been working here for so many years and having a very strong foothold, that reduces the risk for us. So from that standpoint, we have, to a large extent, de-risked the country compared with many of the other places where we could go and work.
Mr. van den Brink, to you, to what extent is the Danish continental shelf competitive?
I should answer like everybody else said. That's a good question, of course. But in terms of competition versus the other countries, we do operate as Wintershall Noordzee in 3 different countries: the UK, Netherlands, and Denmark. It is competitive, I would say. But the next question could be: Are you happy with the situation as it is? Likely not. We would still like to challenge some of the systems, as we do also in the Netherlands. But yeah, we think it's comparable to where we are within other countries. I was in the opportunity 2 years ago as well to give a speech where there was some turbulence around tax issues. And I did say something in my ignorance about that. But yes, that led to a situation where we had to deal with people leaving our venture. But we have managed to resolve that because we had good support from the DNSF. So yes, we are interested in Denmark. Yeah.
And let me, no offense, I'll jump here because, as I mentioned, you've been around, if anybody has. To what extent is the Danish shelf competitive as we speak?
Well, it certainly has potential. But having said that, because we're a global company like Maersk, it's very much in competition with our global portfolio, which extends across America, Africa, Asia, and some other parts of Europe. So it has to compete in that context. And if the competition was tough beforehand, it's a whole lot tougher right now for all the reasons that we've been hearing. But Denmark does have a low political risk, and so that figures into our total our risk assessment. The regulatory framework has been relatively stable. Fiscal regime with some ups and downs, again relatively stable. But I think our view would be that as maturity increases, that we would want to see a sort of the fiscal system match that maturity and have some improvements in that area. But I think the governing all of that is the partnership between industry and government. And we've heard about the work by the Oil and Gas Denmark.
Yes.
And I think that debate extends not just to the Department of Energy, but also to the Treasury in the same way that I think has happened in the UK.
Yes. And Mr. Cook, there was a reason I wanted to ask you lastly, because you are with Dong, which of course has a history in this country that you are very, very aware of. There's been a lot of talk of cooperation. Let's talk about cooperation, not in the sense of cooperating with the authorities, but cooperating amongst the operators. Is it true, as we have been led to believe today, that there is a huge potential for collaboration between the operators in the Danish North Sea?
I always love it when people use unqualified words. Huge. What's huge? We can go there. There is no doubt that there is opportunity for cooperation. As we've heard from all the way from WoodMac through the country representatives, there's good reason to be bullish about the North Sea, whether we're talking about Norway, whether we're talking about the UK, or whether we're talking about Denmark. Certainly our own exploration success in Zana earlier this year, there are new opportunities, developments of things like Hira. And all of these are critical, I think, to making sure that we do deliver as much value as possible out of each of these particular regimes. When we talk about Denmark, infrastructure is going to be critical for us. The ability to collaborate, share, extend the life of infrastructure everywhere from the platforms to the pipelines. And we need to be thinking about this not just in terms of the infrastructure we're using today, but our ability to enhance and collaborate to extend the life of our infrastructure, which not only brings more barrels out of the ground, but further will defer that big A, abandonment word that's coming our way, and give us more time to figure out how to collaborate in that area as well, because that's another area. There's the field and the development at the front end, but there's the back end, and we've got to figure out, as an industry together, how we're going to tackle that big challenge.
Mr. Thomassen, could you pinpoint for us some obvious chances, areas for increased collaboration between the operators?
Well, I mean, obviously we sit on most of the existing infrastructure, and it is aging indeed. But we already have collaboration. The HIRA project that David mentions, we have a project, part of that project on our on the state-owned but Maersk Oil operated GORM-E platform, which I hope we deliver satisfactorily to the HIRA consortium. And the Trim field, which is located in Norway, is produced over one of our platforms. And we did offer to produce HIRA over one of our platforms as well up north. So there is a lot of opportunity for collaboration that can help, in my view, bringing costs down and extending the life of the infrastructure. So, I mean, that's just to mention a few opportunities.
We're talking of a potential. Do you believe it will happen? Or if
well,
not?
it is happening.
Well,
it's there.
But what obviously a lot of observers are looking for is increased cooperation to solve some of the cost issues that we have been looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been a very strong drive for integration, and in connection with the North Sea strategy, we'll hopefully see more of that, of maximizing the utilization of the existing infrastructure, which to me is the best way of collaborating. And obviously, if we get a phone call around someone who wants to use our infrastructure for producing a marginal field, we will be all ears and try to help.
But
like
waiting for the phone call is not really the aggressiveness or the sort of the
No,
speed.
but we don't sit with the discovery, so we essentially don't know what's going on necessarily. So we have to be at the end of that.
Please.
Exactly right. I think you referenced back to the cost conversation that was earlier, where I think people were thinking more of almost operating costs. We're talking about large infrastructure and extending life that's the capital as well as the operating cost. But there are opportunities for that collaboration on the operating level as well. And as Martin and I well know, we're already talking about opportunities for collaboration on everything from warehouses to helicopters, if you will. So those opportunities are there as well. But for an industry that hires some of the brightest minds in the world, sometimes we're not really smart, because we tend to hit these $100 periods and all of a sudden we forget. And we let that idea or that concept of collaboration go. And although that may have been something that was significant in the past when people could have proprietary advantages and they didn't want to collaborate, in today's world, that concept of actually having proprietary advantage on anything for very long is pretty much gone. So I think for all of us to be thinking about collaboration as just a new paradigm in the way we do business is a smart thing for us to do, raise our intelligence even further.
You're nodding. Could you pinpoint for us some very relevant, obvious, immediate opportunities for collaboration that hasn't been exploited to their fullest at the moment?
Well, I think as David alluded to, and we're working with our partners in a number of areas around logistics and supply, and working with suppliers, contractors, contracting. There's work in place, but there's probably a lot more that we could do. And on infrastructure, I mean, that's a much bigger form of collaboration, and clearly for the full development of the Danish sector, it's going to be necessary. However, infrastructure owners and hub platform owners, there is a risk that they take in both on existing activities and in future activities. And I think the question would be to make sure that the conversation, the commercial agreement is fair, and that value and risk is shared equally between owners and those accessing the infrastructure.
Mr. van den Brink, it would be easy to ask you the same question. I won't do that.
I was prepared.
Yeah, I thought you
I had time to think about it.
I won't do that, but I will ask you, I think I was provoked a little by Mr. Cook using the word abandon. Is that relevant at the moment? Are we looking, I'm trying to get some proportions here.
To abandon?
Abandonment. Are you going to abandon operations in the Danish sector?
Oh, I don't think that's what he meant. I don't think in that way we will abandon the operations out there. I think it's more about the infrastructure. If you don't use the infrastructure anymore, you have to clean it up. That's, I think, the abandonment he was referring to.
Is that discussion relevant? What I'm trying to get is a sense of proportion. Are we looking at premature abandonment?
Yes, there is maybe it's easier for me to refer back to the Netherlands, because in Denmark we've only started with one platform, and we're drilling at the right moment, so we will bring that in production early next year. But if I refer to the Netherlands, where the infrastructure is quite mature as well and healthy,
right?
There are a lot of operators asking to keep the infrastructure going for their opportunities. However, the owner itself has no incentive to do so. And that's maybe a position where the government can step in. It's okay, we think it's important. We've just heard the Norwegian say that we need to think about the society. Okay, well, society takes two to tango, of course. I think she's left, she was sitting in the front. But what I'm trying to say, that's, you can take that position as a government and not just look at the companies, because we have shareholders to satisfy as well.
Mr. Thomassen, what is your views on this?
On abandonment and decommissioning, well, I mean, the basic view is that there's a huge task ahead of us in terms of abandoning and decommissioning all the infrastructure in the North Sea that's coming closer with the lower oil price. And we all, I believe, wish to keep our infrastructure running as long as we can. And for us, that's why we are very interested in taking in other assets and producing other assets of our infrastructure. It's coming at us, and I think I completely agree that every participant has a legitimate right to make money. And so nobody can force us to run our infrastructure at a loss, in my world. That would not be reasonable, and that would scare the shareholders away. So a solution has to be found if we have to keep our infrastructure alive, where the totality gets profitable for all the parties that are in, and of course also interesting for the host government.
Yeah, and we have...
This is what starts to bring, all these issues of the marginal field, the sort of brown field, all those sorts of opportunities, or regulatory or perhaps government involvement opportunities sit there equally. I think the number for abandonment you ask, is it significant? I think the current estimate is over 40 billion DKK just in sitting here, so it's significant. So there's a part where we need the conversation amongst ourselves and with the regulators, with the government, but there's a part that's incumbent upon us, which is probably more just dealing with the day-to-day cost element.
You brought into perspective here the authorities, which I was going to do now, bringing us back to Ms. Nyland from Norway, who says that predictability is also the absence of new tax incentives. That's maybe stretching her point a little, but but the point was very clear. There has to be a substantial amount of sustainability and predictability in the tax regime. Now, at the same time, I'm sure you recognize this, the industry always asks for predictability. At the same time now, there's a call for new incentives. How do the two match, Mr. Thomassen?
So, you know, I'm also a great fan of predictability and stability, so I'm not a fan of changing the tax regime every day. And in Denmark, it has been a quite stable tax regime. So I would like to try to avoid talking about tax incentives. I think we have to look at the pre-tax economy of a project, and then the company will have to, the operating or the partnership will have to be able to make an attractive profit. Most companies deal with some sort of discounted cash flow model, but the time value of money may be different to government and to the partnership, which could provide an opportunity of making some sort of a depreciation model or uplift model that helps, and at the end of the day gives more or less the same government take and contractor take. And so that kind of model I would prefer. There's no doubt that a region like the Danish, like Denmark, has come to a maturity stage that where we need to look at how the government take is developed and what the contractor take is organized for future projects.
Mr. Edwards, what's your thinking on this? Which would be the most immediate action that the regulator ought to take in this situation?
Well, I think the fiscal system has to match the level of maturity. I think we've seen some of the examples from the UK, where very mature assets, their life has been prolonged with say brownfields allowances. So that I think there has to be some matching there. But you know, the reference point I think has to be the global competition for capital. So it's ever tighter, ever more difficult. So when I take these projects to my home office in Houston, or head office in Houston, they have to stack up. And the materiality of these projects often is not that high compared to something new in a new frontier or a new country. So you know they have to compete in other ways in terms of return.
And what does that mean for the Danish regulator?
I think that the partnership between the industry as a whole, so suppliers and operators, and the government, including both the energy department and the treasury, has to be productive, strong, and if there is change, that it's predictable, controllable, and it's managed together.
And predictability and tax incentives do go hand in hand. I call them tax incentives just for simplicity. Does it go hand in hand? Or, I mean, to me, there is a certain amount of illogic or lack of logic to the argument here that we need somehow to increase cooperation with the authorities, asking for some sort of help making things profitable. On the other hand, predictability seems to be also very high on the agenda, attracting new investments, etc., etc. I don't really see let's say there's a lack of logic to me in your argument. You're saying both at the same time.
I think
Are you talking to me, Martin?
No, I'm just looking at you. Yes, please.
Well, I may have confused you then, and I apologize for that. And I don't think I'm saying the two things at the same time. We have to acknowledge that Denmark has matured as a hydrocarbon province. We haven't seen the Johan Sverdrup-like discoveries. Actually, we haven't seen a lot of big discoveries over the recent years. So we just have to acknowledge it's mature, and that gives us a different situation in terms of the pre-tax profitability of our projects. And there's still a lot of work to be done, but they're more marginal. So if the country is interested in investments in these projects, we have to find a way where the contractors are able to do it, are incentivized, are motivated to do it. It's as simple as that. And I think if a change to the fiscal regime is made, I would encourage government to work with industry on finding a sustainable way that is not going to last 1 or 2 years, but actually we try to predict what is going to happen at various oil prices, say this is going to be stable for 10, 20 years to come, just like the previous system was, and then you have the predictability you need. So I think the difference is between whether you you say, well, we just change the tax system every time the oil price changes $2 a barrel, or something like that. That doesn't make sense to us, and I don't think it makes sense to a government. So that's what I'm trying to say.
You know,
Does that make more sense? Or still confused?
It made sense the first time. I was just there was a certain let's say I see your point, but I also see that Ms. Nyland would not agree. I'm sure, I think she has left, I'm sorry about that. They don't change their tax regime. They say you can cut cost. We heard the British tell us how they cut cost by 20% in a year.
I do believe that we as an industry has to have a responsibility to work more optimally with our cost picture, and I think every company is doing that. We have an enormous opportunity in terms of cutting costs, and everybody's pursuing that opportunity, and that's our part of that game.
You mentioned, sorry,
Yes.
you've mentioned what Mrs. Newland said, but Michael also made it clear that the UK has actually been perhaps one of the largest swings that we
Certainly.
and that lack of predictability has been a problem throughout my career. It's been a problem because
Yeah.
the UK moves with price, and I completely agree with Jakob in the sense that shouldn't be looking at something where we get into a position that because price moves, we should have new incentives or vice versa. It's more about where are we in the state of our particular industry in this particular sector, and what are the things that will allow us to therefore keep that sector going for decades to come. Much as James pointed out, we're going to have to. We still need that hydrocarbon.
I remind you, the floor is open, and I want to bring into our discussion now the other part of the sector, the service providers, the goods providers, whatever we call them. There's a lot of people depending on your decisions that are not part of your own companies and the operators. Now, I raised the question with the chairman this afternoon when we started off. How do you secure that there is a viable, profitable, qualified service sector after this crisis? Mr. van der Brink.
After the crisis, well, let's use the word predictability again. It's the last time I'm going to say that. No, we always imagine that if you say 10% is predictable for the next years, that's fine. But I think I would agree with these gentlemen, if the fields become more mature, there's another thing you can predict. We shall help each other. So that might mean that 10% is 9, 8, whatever you have it. Now, if that's a cooperation strategy we have between operators and governments, we can apply the same to the contractors as well, of course. If there is a vision that we will prolong operations for longer because there will be help along the way, we can help them as well, and they can help us. So that's the cooperation you're looking at, and that's, I think, also part of the prediction you want to have in the future.
Mr. Edwards, a lot of people in the service providing part of your industry feel that the oil companies are squeezing too hard, you're pushing the cost down the stream, etc. You know the problem better than I do. To what extent are their complaints justified?
I think we've looked at the cost picture in several ways. One has been mentioned before around simply reducing scope, which isn't very sustainable. The second is around simplification and standardization. And I think there is huge potential. And the last area would be around collaboration. And that's collaboration between partners and operators that we've talked about, but the collaboration with suppliers, I think, is obviously a huge part of that. And it's clearly we need to get our cost base down, but we also, perhaps more importantly for the long term, we need to improve our sustainable value and get our efficiency up. So areas like multi-skilling and things that maybe we could examine so that we get stronger together and more robust and sustainable for the future.
But do you recognize the problem that too much of the cost cutting is being demanded of the service providers?
Well, I think the ratcheting back, as I just said, in these three areas, I think is shared across the parties that are involved, and so there is pain, if that's what you mean, and we need to share
That's
the
exactly
pain.
what I
But
mean,
there is
yes.
a real opportunity here actually to emerge stronger, and I suspect that those who collaborate more together will be the ones that are the winners in that.
Mr. Thomassen, lastly, while I remind the room that this is your last chance to address 4 of the executives, here's a question, but I will ask the question to Mr. Thomassen first that I was about to. How many of the present service-providing companies will die?
I mean, we have no intention of pushing any companies out of business. I've seen some of our suppliers today, they're still standing. Some of them are even smiling. So we have no intention. I mean, we are in the business for long term. We realize that we need a supply chain that works. Having said that, it's a really difficult point in time for the industry. And you know, who knows, we may see some consolidation also in the supply chain industry. And that is potentially what's going to happen, just like it's going to happen in the upstream industry.
I will allow one question. We are pushing time, so please be brief.
Okay, I'll make it short. Peter Paschke from DNVGL. So we talked a lot about the industry and the government and the fiscal instruments. What about public opinion and society? You are obviously a master in influencing public opinion as a journalist. So what does it take in Denmark to sort of establish the same climate as there is maybe in the UK and the Netherlands or Norway to support the oil and gas industry? Do you think we are in the same position in Denmark as the other countries are?
In respect of our time here, I will limit the answer time now, not physically, but please be brief. And I think perhaps we should have a final round with each of you, starting off with this question. Public opinion, how do we make people love the oil industry in Denmark? I don't know if you are in a position to answer this, but if you have relevant experience from elsewhere, please enlighten us.
Well, we heard just a point of an observation. I mean, we heard a lot about Norway before, but even in Norway, the equivalent organisation to Oil and Gas Denmark is very concerned about their public image. And there's a lot of talk and plans around how they can improve that. So I don't think it's a problem that's unique to Denmark, and I think it's also been addressed in the UK too. So this is, if you like, a global issue.
Mr. Cook.
Yeah, this is always a tough one because we're trying to tell people that the fact that we dig things up out of the earth and burn them is good. And of course, the perception of that is not. On the other hand, what we saw come out of Paris just last week with the 10 companies saying, you know, the quickest way we can reduce our carbon footprint is undoubtedly by making a fast shift from coal, the dirtiest of the hydrocarbons, to gas. And I think we have to get into the conversation that says we all are looking towards a cleaner future. We all want to change the energy transformation mix. That's certainly something we at Dong Energy are very heavily involved in. But we have to realize that that doesn't happen overnight. And so what can we do to utilize the hydrocarbon portion of that to help that energy transformation to move towards an even cleaner future? And I think that gas is a big piece of the first step. But it's got to be a conversation. It's got to be a very open conversation. You said, how do we hire new people? Well, hopefully they come in with that understanding.
Van den Brink.
It's a difficult one. I'll make a comment on what Morten Beck said as well, that at some stage you will all be driving electric cars. So basically his future is we don't need the oil anymore. That's my conclusion, but I'll leave that for you to think about. But also if I can add in and join in with the Netherlands, yes, we are struggling with the image of the industry, not just the oil, but also with the gas because of the earth traumas, of course, in Groningen, the Groningen gas field, which is quite large and a swing producer. So yes, we have an issue with the industry. We're trying to work on that, and it's not easy because indeed politicians are looking at something else. That's the future. That's also maybe where the generation to come wants to work, because in the Netherlands, we're trying to get a lot of people to get offshore and work there, and they do on wind farms, not in the oil industry.
Thank you, and we will finish where we started off. Mr. Thomassen, the final word.
Yeah, 2 points that I think we've kind of heard in different forms before. One is that as an industry, we have an enormous opportunity in terms of telling the story about what we're doing. And secondly, I do believe that we're part of the solution and that we have not been good at selling, because oil and gas is going to be in the energy mix for many, many years to come. Yeah. And we wish to be part of the solution, recognizing that someday it's over.
Someday it's over.
The lights go out.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Please help me thank the panel. Okay. Thank you very much.